In today's video, I'm going to be painting this landscape with watercolour paints. So let's get to it. The angle in a bit of this video is a bit off, unfortunately. You do get used to it very quickly though. I lost some of the footage from my other camera, so apologies for that. But I'm starting off by drawing out my outline. I'm using a watercolour pencil for that because then it will blend out as I add layers. And then I'm preserving the white areas. I want to keep the whitest with some masking fluid. I've just got a small brush to do that, and I've coated the brush with some soap to begin with because it makes it easier to clean. You don't ruin your brushes as quickly. I'm now going over the sky with a blue colour and just a light wash, and then going back over it again in smaller areas just to add the texture where I want the clouds to be, because it's mountains and clouds. And then I'm adding in some shadows through my mountains. So I'm just going to keep working and building up on the colour in the sky and the mountains until I'm happy before I move down to the water. When I'm in the water and when I paint water, I use horizontal motions mainly to give that impression, and they keep the perspective. And I'm adding in what will be shadows in the water because this is going to be a tree-lined mountain range, as you can see from the image on the top left. So now going back in, just adding more depth to my sky in areas that I want darker, and then again adding a few more shadows into my mountains. I'm using like a Payne's grey with a bit of black and a bit of blue in there to add the shadows in the mountains. The colours that are used don't really matter that much. It's more making sure that your values are how you want your values to be. Adding a bit more green to that colour as well now, because as I say, it's sort of like a tree-lined mountain range. So the impression of grass and trees to the bottom of those mountains. And I'm just darkening up my reflections in my water. Again, as you can see, mainly horizontal motions, and when I've added a bit too much, I use a tissue just to blot it back up again. The good thing about watercolours is you can lift them out to a certain degree. If you've gone too wild with your water, just use a piece of tissue to lift that up again. This was the first landscape I'd done in a while, and I try, as with all paintings, to work sort of from what's furthest back and then coming forward. So I tried to get the most of my mountains and my sky in first, and then I'll move forward to the lake, which is still sort of behind the land that I'm now painting, because the land sort of comes over the water a little bit. So I painted the sky and then the mountains, then the bit of the water, and then I'm coming in to add the land, which is further forward. Just using a mixture of greens. I've got a sap green in there. I think I've got a hooker's green, and a bit of yellow ochre here and there. And then at this front, there's some flowers at the front. Again, just use my greens and a bit of red in there. And I've sprinkled some salt over because I was experimenting to see if I could sort of get a diffused, out of focus, floral look in the foreground. That's what I was going for there. The angle's changed again now. Now I'm just rubbing off the masking fluid because I'm ready to keep working. So you will get used to this angle fairly quickly. I lost the footage from my overhead camera, so this is the best I could do, but I still thought this tutorial might be useful. Well, not so much a tutorial, but this video might still be useful to some people, so that's why I've decided to carry on. I'm adding more details now to my foreground, some more browns. I think I've got a burnt umber and a bit of burnt sienna in there, with a bit of yellow ochre. I'm just adding in some of the more brown areas and now adding some of the impression of some of the trees in the background. So again, I'm just using sort of like a burnt umber, I think, and I've got a little bit of green mixed in with that. And as I come further forward, I'll add more greens and yellows to the trees. So starting off with sort of a mid-tone really for my trees. I will go through and add darks and lights, add my shadows and highlights a little bit later on. The trees aren't just one colour. Even if you've sort of been a bit impressionistic like the watercolour painting is, you've still got numerous colours in trees and things, so you don't really want to keep them just one colour. It'll be a bit flat. If I did this portrait again, I would make the mountains probably just a bit more faded away and a bit more blue to push them a lot further back. But I did want some detail in them, so I was umming and ahhing how to go about making them in this portrait, so that's what's happened. So yeah, still working on my trees. I think I'm adding a bit more dark in there now. So all I'm doing is I've got my greens. I'm either adding a tiny bit of black or a tiny bit of burnt umber to those greens to make them stand out and to make them darker, the shadows. I'm adding some more detail through the front here to the bushes now they're dry. If you use salt, you need to let them dry naturally to get the effect. They sort of like, I don't know, it's good for snow as well, the salt effects, but to make for it to work properly, it can't be too wet, it can't be too dry, and your paper can make a difference as well. It happens in this that I end up painting over the majority of it, but it was nice as a base, as a background. I'd say that effect is very good for sort of snow and for flowers and out of focus diffused flowers, but you do need to let it dry naturally. If you dry it with a hairdryer, you won't get the same effect. I'm using a sponge now to get in some of my trees and shrubs detail. So I've literally just a kitchen sponge that I've cut up, and I'm dabbing that into my paint, and it's just given me some bushes and shrubbery. Again, I will add more details to them later. And now going through my water with some blues and just using horizontal motion. You saw there, I scrubbed it away a bit. It wasn't the right colour that I wanted, so I just went over with a clean brush and lifted that up. But again, always working in a horizontal motion when I'm in the water to keep the perspective and to keep it looking water-like. If you go vertically, you're going to ruin your perspective and it's not going to look very natural. Going through with a bit of, I think it's yellow ochre. It's some yellowy colour. Again, what colours I'm using, I'm not entirely sure. You don't have to use the same colours to get the same sort of effect. Just make sure that your lights are light enough, your darks are dark enough, as always. It's all about your contrast, really. And so this is more of an impressionistic, expressive landscape look. So I don't need to be highly detailed. I don't want to be highly detailed. I just want to leave an impression of what this looks like. So I've mixed a little bit of white gouache, I think, in with some of my yellow ochre just to get the a few sort of beigey highlights just then. Or it might have been the white, actually might have been the white watercolour thinking about it. I think it was the white watercolour. I'll add gouache a bit later for my final highlights. I think that was just the white watercolour paint. So a few more fine details in the front, just adding some more of the stalks, adding my darks because it was looking a bit wishy-washy. So even though I'm being impressionistic, I still need to concentrate on where my lights and darks are, otherwise it'll look more cartoony than impressionistic. You don't need to go into deep detail. You see I'm drying it off now. In between layers I do dry it, otherwise you end up with a complete muddy mess. So if we finish the layer, if it's not looking how you want it to do, dry it off and then rework the area. Just going through, this is with the white gouache, just adding extra highlights where I didn't quite preserve it as much as I'd have liked. Adding a bit more sparkle along the water's edge and in the water and throughout those mountains to make them look a bit more snowy. A few more yellows and a few more details, and that is pretty much it for this one. So thank you all for watching. I hope you found it useful.
Thank you all for watching. If you found this video useful, please leave me a thumbs up. I post new content every Thursday. If you don't want to miss anything, please press the subscribe button below. You can also press that bell icon. It makes sure that you get notified by YouTube for all new content I post. That's it from me now. Bye, guys.